Hello and welcome to Temple of Akasha, the home of embodied spirituality with me, Natasha. Today I want to talk about the menstrual cycle and specifically menstruation for women as a monthly vision quest. The menstrual cycle in general, for me, is one of the most significant areas of distortion that we must unpick and unpack as we journey back to wholeness and liberation. Humanity cannot be truly free and liberated until the feminine, and specifically women, have been liberated from patriarchal programming. And women cannot be liberated from patriarchal programming until they have deconstructed the patriarchy within themselves around their own bodies and around the power that being a woman that bleeds holds for them. Being a woman that moves through, even if not the physical, the energetic process of menstruating. And so today I want to specifically speak about when we menstruate, when we bleed, and the significance of that. And the reason that I want to speak about that today is because that's where I am right now. I'm in that liminal phase of my cycle where I'm just teetering between life and death. I think, about a day away from my bleed, and I can feel the shift from kind of the dying embers of autumn into my inner winter. And for me, there's no better space to teach about something than when I'm actually in that embodied space myself. When it comes to society's understanding of menstruation or, having a period, it's so full of distortion that we almost need to do away with everything that we've been told and just start afresh. So if you're a woman watching this and you're wanting to reorientate your relationship to your body and your menstrual cycle, my suggestion is approach this with a childlike sense of awe, curiosity, wonder, and magic, because our connection to the magic of this process has been deliberately severed. And it is an essential rite of passage and initiation for women to reclaim the link to their bodies and their menstrual cycles and their womb space. So society, as we know, views menstruation, and especially when we're bleeding, as a time of, being burdensome or disruptive or inconvenient. It's dismissed as something that is just simply getting in the way of everyday life. It's dismissed as something that is disgusting or gross. It's dismissed as something taboo. And this is internalized by us as women. And unfortunately, very few of us have had conscious teachers of this process. Most of us are just thrust into menstruation with no education whatsoever, and it's a time of great shame, great confusion, and then we live with this conditioned experience for the rest of our lives unless we actually take the time to re-educate ourselves. And it is my hope that if you're watching this serves to be part of your re-education and reorientation process, because as someone that has moved from states of very deep dissonance with my body to the space I am now, I'm telling you that this is absolutely essential to your feminine reclamation and liberation. So today I want to speak specifically about the time when we bleed, because really as part of our cycle, this is the time generally when I think most women have the most resistance, and we therefore bypass, avoid, dismiss, or deny the actual deeper magic and gold that we can mine from the time when we menstruate. So I'm going to just briefly touch on the stages of the menstrual cycle, so you've got context for this phase of your cycle. We can think of the menstrual cycle like moving through the seasons of nature, with the menstruation or menstrual phase being the inner winter, and then we move through each season accordingly. So roughly each week, give or take a few days, correlates to a season. So when we ovulate, we are in our inner summer. This is the time when we have the most sense of individual will or agency, when we're probably feeling more anchored in that masculine polarity of doing and being productive. But as cyclical beings, this is not a cycle or a stage of the cycle that's supposed to last. We move from that very expanded state into the inner autumn, the premenstrual phase, the luteal phase, into the inner winter, the bleed. The first day of our cycle begins when we bleed, and then we eventually emerge out of that, out of the winter into the inner spring, the follicular stage. So we move through seasons, cycles, and rhythms as women. We have a very different hormonal experience to men. And so it is not in our best interest or society's best interest for us to try and emulate the embodiments and states of being as men, because we are inherently different biologically. And when we are approaching and experiencing the time of our bleed, we are at our most permeable as women. When we menstruate and when we begin to enter this void space of the inner winter of menstruation, it's a very sacred spiritual time for women. It's a time where the invitation is to dissolve the egoic self and merge with the divine. I cannot think of a more beautiful and a sacred initiation than this. Our lived experience in mainstream culture is to take pills, to numb out, to avoid, to deny, and to have resistance to this part of the cycle, because it actually puts us at odds with the pace of the patriarchal programming, right? Because the patriarchy wants us on the hamster wheel, doing, producing. And when we menstruate, we're being invited to do the opposite. We're being invited to slow down, to incubate, to insulate, to become insular in our experience, to go within. What is truly divine about the time when we menstruate as women is that we become oracles. When you have deconditioned enough from the bullshit about what your period is, what your menstrual cycle is, and you start to actually begin to sense into the energetics underneath your experience, you will start to feel the subtle shifts between each season. And when you reach your inner winter, you will feel the invitation to descend into the underworld, to descend within yourself, to stop being part of the noise and instead merge with that which cannot be seen, touched, tasted, smelled, felt with the senses. We are being invited to descend into the non-physical, to merge with the divine. It's truly a blessing. And the reason it's such a challenge to do this is because the inner winter is essentially an ego death. Every single month, we as women have the opportunity to face an ego death. In fact, arguably, we do face an ego death. It's just whether or not we put up a fight to that, as most do, or whether we surrender and allow ourselves to be undone in service to the one. And this ego death dissolves us, dissolves the structures that we may have put in place in the month to get things done, to be in that sense of individual agency, to be productive. And it dissolves those structures so that we can really tune in and become attuned to what is most needed from us, what is needed of us, what is needed through us for the next cycle. To me, menstruating is a vision quest, a monthly vision quest Vision quests are experiences where typically someone would take themselves out into nature and move through a period of initiation where they would put themselves through deliberate challenge with no food, no drink sometimes no shelter for prolonged periods of days, so that they can become empty, so that they can empty themselves of ideology and expectation and conditioning, and just really sink into their beingness, sink into communion with God. We have that experience internally every single month as women. We have this opportunity to disconnect from the outside world and commune, deeply commune with the sanctity of life. And I'm in that space right now. I kind of call it like my shelf dropping off, when my inner autumn, my luteal phase, is coming to an end, and I can feel the approach of the bleed. And to me, it's like descending down steps. If I was to go into like an underground temple, it's like I'm descending down steps. I'm descending into a quieter, stiller space, a more sacred space. And the outside world is holding less and less value, less and less, I don't want to say value in that it's not valuable, but it's less compelling, because there's a deeper calling, there's a deeper invitation, and it's not out there. This is not an easy process, because as we know with an ego death, surrendering the egoic structure and the constructs that we've built around what our life should look like, what we should be doing, who we should be, surrendering all of those things is not easy. But there is a beauty in menstruation where, if we can allow ourselves the time to slow down, to sink in, to be still, to listen within, we will feel that we're held by the goddess, by the divine mother, by that beautiful womb-like energy of the creatrix herself, of that feminine aspect of universal consciousness, the nurturing, the nourishment, the unconditional love. It's there and it's available to us, but it's subtle, and therefore it requires us to descend into more subtle layers of our being. It requires us to become more energetically attuned, as opposed to attuned to the visceral and the gross levels of reality. So to some degree, it does require a certain level of consciousness or a certain level of awareness to be able to more deeply connect, because it's not a big, obvious hoo-ha of an event. It happens in the stillness, in the slowness. And as we know, being still, being slow, being soft, these are not principles that are generally encouraged in our society. But our opportunity, our task as women, is to notice that we're living in a society that was not designed to encourage the liberation of the feminine, was not designed to encourage the embracing of the feminine pole of our consciousness within all of us. And it's our sacred task and duty to fucking go there and embrace these aspects anyway. We must lead the way in this revolution. When it comes to liberating the feminine aspect of consciousness, we are the feminine incarnated in form. And so we have this opportunity with the menstrual cycle to be living embodiments of the goddess, this wildly cyclical, rhythmic, beautiful flow of life. And the menstrual cycle is a flow. It's always changing. It's always evolving. And we move through this flow every single month, through this expansion and contraction, through this rebirth and this death. And it's an opportunity to have a spiritual initiation every single month if we allow it. In many ways, being a woman is potentially a fast track to becoming more illuminated. But we have so much conditioning around our menstrual cycle that it's hard to access that deeper wisdom. So if you're there with me, floating between worlds right now, if you're just about to bleed, or you're in your inner autumn and you can feel that when you slow down and you stop, there is a longing and an aching within you. And that longing and that aching is asking you to just drop it. Drop everything. Drop the shoulds. Drop the conditioning. Drop the perceived load that you felt you've had to carry, and descend into the chamber. Descend into the chamber of your womb, of your undoing. Let yourself be undone by this process. Let yourself be nourished by this process. One of the major gifts I found with menstruating especially is that if I can navigate that tricky time between my inner winter when I'm premenstrual, and the inner autumn can be a little bit tricky sometimes. That's typically when we have PMS, and there's that agitation where we can sense that something is changing, that we're getting increasingly more sensitive, that we don't have as much energy, and so there can be that sense that something's changing, and navigating that can be a bit tricky, right? Because it's kind of at odds with the world we live in. But if we can gift ourselves the space, time, and awareness to ease ourselves into the inner winter, we are so nourished energetically by our menstrual cycle. We shed old weight, we shed older energy as we physically bleed. We move energy in the body, and we are exposed to that kind of permeable state where we can actually feel the presence of the divine so much more viscerally. The veil is very thin during the menstrual cycle, so that's why women tend to be more sensitive, more emotional. The lower expressions of this are, being agitated and angry and crying and reactive, and that's because we haven't been given the tools to navigate this space consciously. But when we do have those tools, it's such a deeply nourishing, beautiful, and peaceful time. I will actually say that it is my favorite time of the month now. As someone that went from being so disconnected, so at odds with my body, to the space I'm in now, I look forward to my bleed. And partly, I'll be honest, it's because I still find myself operating in that kind of predominantly masculine pole of my consciousness of doing, going, productivity, and deriving a sense of worth from that productivity. And so when my bleed comes, when I'm emerging into that inner winter space, it's like I don't really have a choice. I mean, I can resist it, and sometimes I do resist it. I resist that descending. I resist that undoing. I resist that, just unraveling. But this month, I'm not resisting. I can feel the call into the chamber. I can feel the divine summoning me to go deeper, to be stiller, to be softer, to be more surrendered. And when I answer that call, it's like coming home. It's like coming home. It's like, oh yeah, this is who I am. This is what it's about. I'm so held. I'm so loved. I'm so connected to my gifts. I'm so connected, and they're not even my gifts, right? I'm so connected to the gifts gifted to me from spirit. I'm so connected to my intuition. I'm so connected to nature. I'm highly sensitive during this time, and as a highly sensitive, empathic person, for many years, that totally threw me, right? Because it's like I'm even more sensitive during this sensitive time. It's just system overload, excuse me. So that's why as women, when we become more conscious of this phase, it's important to, as much as we can, modify our reality and our life to accommodate this period of vision questing, to accommodate this period where we are going to be more insular. If you're self-employed, as I'm in the process of becoming, can we modify our calendars so that we're not taking on as much work during that time? Can we use the stage before, premenstrual stage, to prepare so that we can lighten our load for the inner winter? Can we carve out moments of self-care throughout the day? We should be doing this anyway, but especially important during the time of bleeding. And can we just create a container for this beautiful process to unravel? That's the invitation. It's so sacred and so misunderstood, but I feel it is so essential to the liberation of the feminine and of indeed women. So I'm going to end with just a couple of embodiment practices that you can potentially do if you are in your own inner winter period right now, or you're approaching it. Things that can feel nourishing, low lighting. You know, I mean, I'm sure if you're like me, you love candles and low lighting anyway. But when we're in that inner winter phase and we are feeling more sensitive, and there is this sense of like, there's something deeper, but I have to lean in and really listen in order to be able to hear it. Actually creating like a womb-like environment really helps. So like closing the curtains, shutting out the outside world, turn off your devices, set energetic boundaries, light some candles, and really truly be present and nourish yourself. My ritual through this time, so I do like a yoni steam a couple of days before I'm due to bleed. I did one yesterday and it was beautiful. And then I will tend to slow down earlier in the evening than normal. I'll turn my devices off earlier than normal, and I'll put on some beautiful music. I'll light some candles. I'll shut out the outside world. I'll do some self-massage. I will maybe do a little bit of free movement, some dance, or just swaying, or anything intuitively that my body needs. And crucially, I just give myself permission as much as I can. It's not always easy. I give myself that permission to soften, because what you'll tend to find is that there does tend to be a lot of rawness and emotionality, that arises during this time. There is a tenderness to this space that has to be navigated with tenderness if we really want to build a beautiful and conscious relationship with our bodies and with this cycle. So I invite you to, whenever you're next bleeding, if you're a woman watching this, to just see if you can approach it with a bit more softness, with a bit more awareness. Can you gift yourself just a few more minutes each day, a period to be indulgent, a period to be soft, a period to be still, a period to sit back and ask, what do I really need right now? And to gift that to yourself. Start there. And I will create some more videos in the next few weeks with regards to the wider cycle in general. And I'm really keen to start sharing some embodiment practices and some bodywork practices. So I hope I will have the space to do that as well. And that will hopefully assist you during your bleed and throughout your cycle in general. So I would love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your feedback, your questions, your comments, anything with regards to this, because I'd like to gauge where everyone is and also hear other people's experiences of their relationship to their cycle. So please share in the comments below if you feel called to. And as always, if this has been helpful, please like, subscribe and share. It helps the aligned audience find me. And I look forward to connecting with you again in the next video. Take care, guys. Thank you.